At my housewarming party, my sister announced, "Your $960,000 house is perfect for my kids." Then my mom added, "Pack your bags." I simply smiled, pulled out my phone, and showed them the document that changed everything. "Remember when you kicked me out at 18? Said, "I bought this house with." I still remember the sensation of my own hand trembling as I stood in the foyer of my home for the very first time as its legal owner. The shaking wasn't from the cold, and it wasn't from exhaustion, though heaven knows I had endured plenty of that over the years. It wasn't even from despair. My hands trembled because for 14 years, I had imagined this exact moment in 1,000 different ways, and none of those imagined versions had prepared me for how quietly overwhelming it would truly feel. The marble beneath my feet seemed unreal, like something I had somehow created from nothing but determination and a stubborn refusal to vanish. The house cost $960,000. I want you to sit with that number for a moment. Not because I'm trying to impress anyone, but because I need you to understand what it represents. Every zero in that figure is tied to a year of eating ramen noodles alone in a tiny studio apartment that carried the faint smell of someone else's cooking. Each one is another rejection email from an investor that I read at 2 in the morning before deleting it so it wouldn't take root in my chest. Every zero represents an extra shift I picked up, a scholarship essay I rewrote 11 different times, and a night I spent sleeping in the backseat of a 2003 Honda Civic in a parking garage off Route 9 in Framingham, Massachusetts, simply because I had nowhere else to go. Every zero is a scar. And over time I learned that scars are really just receipts. Proof that something cost you dearly, and evidence that you survived the transaction. My name is Hazel Matthews. I'm 32 years old. And the night of my housewarming party was the night everything finally reached its breaking point. If you've ever attended a gathering where it felt like two completely different atmospheres existed in the same room, then you know exactly what that evening felt like. On one side there was warmth. My colleagues from the tech industry were there, along with 2 venture capital partners who had believed in me from the beginning. My mentor, Professor Reynolds, stood nearby in a blazer that was slightly too large but somehow perfectly suited to him. My business partner, Stephanie, kept walking around the room refilling people's wine glasses while laughing loudly at her own jokes in the most delightful way. It was the kind of gathering that felt like a collective sigh of relief, a living exhale. We had all worked incredibly hard for a very long time, and this house was the physical proof that those years had meant something. And then my mother and my sister arrived. I heard the door open before I actually saw them, not because they knocked loudly, but because something inside me had always been wired to sense their presence, the same way you feel the air pressure shift right before a storm. I was in the middle of a conversation with Professor Reynolds when I felt it, that subtle tightening across my shoulders, the old instinct urging me to make myself smaller, quieter, easier to overlook. I had spent years trying to unlearn that instinct. Even now, I was still working on it. My sister Cassandra stepped inside wearing a cream-colored wrap dress that probably cost more than my first month's rent years ago. She was beautiful, she always had been, in that specific way that comes from growing up rarely hearing the word no. She had 3 children at home with her husband, Eric, and a lifestyle that appeared effortless from the outside because she had spent years making sure no one examined it too closely. My mother, Ella Lehner, walked in just behind her. Somehow she seemed smaller than I remembered, wearing the same expression she had worn during every major moment of my life, a look that seemed to say, "I see you succeeding, and I'm already calculating what it costs me." I smiled politely, walked across the room, and hugged them both. "This is beautiful," my mother said. Yet the way she spoke made the compliment sound more like an accusation. Cassandra didn't say anything at first. Instead, she simply looked around. Her eyes moved slowly across the open-plan living room, the 12-foot ceilings, and the kitchen with the waterfall island that I had spent 3 weeks debating before finally ordering. She studied everything the way someone examines an object they intend to evaluate rather than appreciate. I recognized that look immediately. I'd seen it before. The last time I saw that exact expression, I was 18 years old, sitting at our kitchen table in Medford, Massachusetts, staring at a spreadsheet I was never supposed to find. But to understand that moment, we have to go back further, because this story didn't really begin at a housewarming party. It began in a house that never truly felt like home. My sister and I grew up in a middle-class neighborhood in Boston, the daughters of Dennis and Ella Laner Matthews. My father was a contractor who worked long hours but laughed easily. Then one day, when I was 9 years old and Cassandra was 13, he stopped doing both. There's no dramatic story about how he left. No screaming arguments. No shattered dishes. No obvious villain. Instead, he simply withdrew slowly, the way the tide gradually pulls away from the shore. Eventually he was just gone. He moved in with a woman named Patricia in Quincy, and he called on birthdays with a kind of guilty cheerfulness that ultimately accomplished nothing. My mother handled his departure the same way she handled most things in life, by choosing a single focal point and pouring all of her energy into it. From that moment forward, the focal point was Cassandra. I understand it now in the complicated way a person can intellectually understand something while still feeling its weight pressing on their chest decades later. Cassandra was older. She was more outgoing, more expressive, and far more comfortable taking up space in a room. She came home with art projects, friends, stories, drama, and constant bursts of energy. My mother fed off that energy the way a plant turns toward sunlight. I, on the other hand, was quieter. I read constantly. I earned good grades simply because I genuinely loved learning, not because I was trying to impress anyone. In a household that had just lost its center of gravity, quiet and self-sufficient looked a lot like someone who didn't need anything. So I received nothing. Or rather, I received the assumption that I would always be fine. Cassandra got a car when she turned 16. Used, yes, but still a car. She also had a lavish Sweet 16 party that my mother talked about for years afterward. She got new clothes every fall, regular shopping trips to the mall, and enrollment in dance classes she begged for, only to abandon them 3 months later. When my sister started dating boys, my mother guided her through that stage of life with the patience of a woman who believed her daughter was something delicate and precious, something that needed constant care and protection. When Cassandra experienced her first heartbreak, the entire house seemed to grieve with her. But when my own heart was broken for the first time, I cried quietly into a pillow and told no one. Cassandra married at the age of 26. Her husband, Eric Chambers, was a financial analyst from a respected family in Newton. Their wedding was extraordinary. Truly extraordinary. I am not exaggerating when I say it was breathtakingly beautiful. The ceremony was held at a stunning venue in the Berkshires. There were 120 guests, and the flowers alone, something I learned later, cost $11,000. My mother cried throughout the entire ceremony. Cassandra looked radiant. Eric gazed at her as though she were the most remarkable woman he had ever seen. I stood there in my bridesmaid dress, smiling. And I meant most of that smile because despite everything, she was still my sister. On that day, she looked genuinely happy. At that time, however, I did not fully understand the real cost of the wedding. The total was $50,000. That was the number, $50,000, that my mother simply did not have. Yet it was spent under the belief that Cassandra deserved the wedding day of her dreams. Somewhere between the flowers, the venue deposit, and the catering bill, almost every dollar my mother had saved disappeared. Included in that amount, as I would later discover, was money that had been meant for me. I was 18 years old when I found the spreadsheet. It was a Sunday afternoon in late July, one of those heavy, humid Boston summer days when the air feels thick and everything seems slightly underwater. My mother was out, and Cassandra was attending a bridal shower for someone I didn't even know. I was using my mother's laptop to print a college application essay I had been working on for weeks. When I opened the file browser, I noticed a folder labeled simply, Finances. I should have closed it. Even now, 14 years later, I still don't know whether opening that folder was instinct or something closer to premonition. Somewhere deep inside, I think I already knew. The body has its own ledger, even when the mind refuses to examine it. The spreadsheet contained several tabs. One of them was labeled Cassie House Fund. When I clicked on it, a number appeared that made the room feel as if it tilted slightly. $22,000. The number had been tracked across multiple deposits stretching back 2 years. Beside it, in another column, was a source label I recognized immediately. College. I sat at the kitchen table for a very long time. That money was the college fund my father had created before he left. It was the same fund my grandmother contributed to every year on my birthdays. It was the fund my mother had repeatedly promised was safe and waiting for me when I was ready for college. It was also the financial foundation around which I had built every scholarship application and academic plan, assuming it would help stretch my opportunities further. Instead, over 2 years, the money had been quietly redirected. The transfers had been made in small increments, small enough that I never thought to question them. That money had been moved into a fund intended for Cassandra's future house. She and Eric wanted to buy a home in Arlington and needed assistance with a down payment. My mother had decided the most convenient resource was me. She never asked. She never explained. She simply made the decision. Printed my essay. Then I sat at the kitchen table with a spreadsheet still open and waited for my mother to come home. Over the years, I have tried to reinterpret the conversation that followed. I have attempted to frame it as a misunderstanding, a breakdown in communication, or the result of financial pressure. I have tried to view it as a mother doing her imperfect best under difficult circumstances. I have offered every possible charitable interpretation. But the truth is this. When I showed my mother what I had discovered, when I calmly explained exactly what the spreadsheet revealed, her first reaction was not guilt. It was irritation. "Don't be selfish," she said. "Your sister needs a stable home when they start their family." I replied that I needed a college education. "You can go to community college," she said. "Plenty of people do. You're smart enough to make it work." I reminded her that we had made a plan. My entire college strategy, my applications, my scholarships, had been built around the financial promise she had given me. And then she said the sentence that has lived in my body ever since. The sentence that resurfaces at strange moments, while waiting in airports, during board meetings, or on quiet Sunday mornings. "Accept this," she said, "or pack your bags." She didn't say it cruelly. That is the part that still unsettles me. She said it in the calm, matter-of-fact tone someone uses when they believe a decision is already final. To her, the matter was settled. My role was simply to accept it with grace. And if I could not do that, perhaps I needed to reconsider whether I belonged in the home she was managing. Cassandra was sitting there during the entire conversation. She said nothing. She stared down at the kitchen table. I went upstairs, packed a bag, returned to the kitchen, and walked out the front door. Neither of them tried to stop me. For 2 weeks I lived in my car. 14 days in a parking garage in Framingham. I was able to stay there because a friend from school had an older brother who worked the overnight shift and allowed me to remain there as long as I left before 6 o'clock in the morning. I showered at the YMCA, paying $7 each day. I ate whatever food I could afford, which was not much. During those 2 weeks I cried exactly twice. After that I stopped. Crying inside a Honda Civic in a parking garage at 2 in the morning doesn't actually solve anything. My body seemed to understand that quickly, redirecting all that emotion into planning. I had been accepted to UMass Amherst. It wasn't my dream school, but it was a legitimate university, one with a solid reputation. Their financial aid package would cover tuition if I combined it with work-study and a part-time job. So I recalculated everything. I adjusted the numbers until the plan worked on paper. Then, one afternoon while sitting in the public library using the internet, I received an email from Professor David Reynolds. He had been my AP economics teacher in high school and was now working as adjunct faculty at UMass. Through a mutual connection, he had heard that something difficult had happened at home. His message was simple. "Are you okay?" I replied with a single sentence. "I'm managing." His response arrived shortly afterward. "My spare room has a bed and a desk," he wrote. "You're welcome to stay there until September." I drove to his house that very evening. I stayed for 3 months. To this day, I have never properly thanked Professor Reynolds for what he did. And honestly, I don't think I ever will. There simply aren't words powerful enough to express gratitude for a kind of generosity that asks for nothing in return yet gives someone everything they need at exactly the moment they need it most. He didn't make a big deal out of it. Instead, he simply prepared the room, pointed out where the good coffee was kept, and treated me like a complete, capable human being who could make her own choices. That simple respect, so ordinary for some, was, for me, the most radical kindness anyone had shown in a very long time. In September, I moved into the dormitories at UMass. I had a scholarship, a work-study position in the library, a part-time job at a cafe off campus, and almost nothing else to my name. Yet despite having so little, I felt happier than I had in years. It was in my introductory computer science class that I met Stephanie Park. Stephanie came from Los Angeles. She had a loud personality in the best possible way and possessed a sharp, practical understanding of money that came from growing up in a household where there was never quite enough of it. She was studying information systems and quietly suspected that most financial tools were created by people who had never truly been broke, making those tools almost useless for the very people who needed them the most. We began talking about it the way 20-year-olds do. Openly, without filters, and without the learned caution that tells adults their ideas are supposed to feel impossible before they eventually feel inevitable. What if someone built an app? Stephanie asked one night as we sat drinking coffee and eating the worst instant ramen I have ever tasted. Something that does for personal finance what a really good accountant does, but makes it available to people who can't afford a really good accountant. Her idea immediately took me back to my 18-year-old self. Sitting alone in a parking garage with a spreadsheet I had stumbled upon by accident, my carefully imagined future suddenly dismantled, desperately wishing someone could help me see a path forward. "Let's build it," I said. "I won't pretend that the next decade unfolded like a quick montage." Didn't. The process was slow, exhausting, and often humiliating. There were long stretches filled with genuine doubt, periods when I seriously considered giving up completely, finding a normal job, earning a normal salary, and living a normal life. For 2 years we bootstrapped everything. 14 investors rejected us. I still remember one of them telling us, very kindly actually, that the market we were targeting, young adults struggling financially, wasn't worth pursuing. His reasoning was simple. People in financial distress don't have money to spend on apps. I thanked him politely for his time, went home, and rewrote our pitch for what must have been the 11th time. Eventually, we received a small grant from a Women in Tech Foundation. It was $11,000, an amount that felt at the time like $1 million. With it, we hired our very first contractor. We launched a beta version of the app. Looking back, it wasn't particularly impressive, but it solved a real problem, and people recognized that immediately. From there, it began to grow. First came word of mouth. Then a mention in a personal finance newsletter. After that, a partnership with a credit union. And then there was the moment everything changed. A viral post on social media. A 23-year-old woman in Cincinnati uploaded a video of herself paying off the final balance on her credit card using a strategy the app had created for her. She was laughing and crying at the same time, overwhelmed with relief and joy. The video received 4 million views in just 3 days. After that, things moved differently. By the time I turned 29, we had 800,000 users. By 30, a fintech company that had been watching our growth for 18 months made us a 9-figure acquisition offer. Stephanie and I spent 6 weeks negotiating. We hired lawyers who turned out to be worth every single cent we paid them. And then we signed. I won't share the exact amount here, but I will say this. It was enough. Enough to buy a house. Enough to never again check my bank balance with trembling hands. Enough to know that if someone ever told me to pack my bags again, I could simply smile, because I had already unpacked somewhere they could never take away from me. I found the property in April, a craftsman-style house in a quiet neighborhood outside Boston. It had 4 bedrooms, original hardwood floors refinished into a warm honey color, and a kitchen with marble countertops. Above the sink was a window that looked out onto a backyard where an enormous oak tree had clearly been standing peacefully for at least a century. I closed on the house in June. Standing alone in the empty foyer, I pressed both palms flat against the wall just to confirm that it was real. $960,000. Every zero felt like a receipt for the journey that had brought me there. The housewarming party took place in September. 60 people attended. The evening was catered and filled with a kind of warmth and lively chaos that makes a gathering feel truly alive. Stephanie gave a toast that first made everyone laugh and then, unexpectedly, brought a few people to tears. Professor Reynolds spent most of the evening standing quietly near the fireplace, wearing the same pleased expression I remembered from the day I graduated. Several colleagues from the acquisition were also there. People I respected, people I genuinely liked, people who had witnessed the app grow from a simple idea into something real. And my mother and my sister were there too because I had invited them. Despite everything that had happened, they were still my family. And a part of me, the part that stubbornly refuses to stop hoping, believed that maybe this moment could be different. But I should have known better. Hazel, I told myself as I stood in the foyer, watching Cassandra's eyes sweep across the room like a calculator measuring every corner. You should have known better. She spent the first hour touring the place. There's really no other word for it. She moved from room to room with Eric trailing slightly behind her, wearing the same expression I'd seen countless times on House Hunters on HGTV, evaluating, pricing, and mentally rearranging everything she saw. She made comments like, "This is charming," but the tone made charming sound more like a consolation prize than a compliment. Then she added, "And you've done well for yourself," in a voice that suggested well was something temporary, something that might not last. She ran her fingers across the marble countertops the way someone might touch an item they were thinking about purchasing. My mother hovered near the food table, receiving whispered updates from Cassandra whenever they thought I wasn't paying attention. Around 8 o'clock I gave my speech. I had written it out and rehearsed it, but when the moment came, most of the words came from memory, from that place where the real truth lives. I talked about the years of hard work. I talked about Stephanie. I thanked Professor Reynolds. I explained that this house represented something important, something I needed everyone in the room to understand, that nothing which costs you everything is truly wasted, that survival itself is no small achievement, and that I was deeply and unreservedly grateful to be standing in my own home surrounded by people who had seen how hard I had worked for it. The room applauded, and I felt something loosen slightly in my chest. Then Cassandra stood up. She did it without being asked, which should have been my first warning. She lifted her wine glass and smiled at the room with the easy confidence of someone who had always believed she was the most interesting person present. In a voice loud enough for everyone to hear, she said, "This house would be perfect for my kids." The room fell quiet, but she kept talking. She wore that familiar expression from our childhood, the one that meant she had already made a decision and was now simply announcing it as if it were inevitable. 3 bedrooms, she said. They could each have their own room for once. And that yard. She glanced toward the window. Dylan has been asking for a yard for 2 years. I looked at my mother. She looked back at me, and the expression on her face wasn't embarrassment. It was something closer to agreement. "Hazel," my mother said, using the same tone she always used when she was about to turn something enormous into something that sounded minor. "A condo would suit you better. Honestly, you're single now. You don't need all this space." Meanwhile, Cassandra had already stepped into the hallway and was pointing toward the staircase, explaining to Eric which bedroom would belong to which child. She was assigning rooms in my house, at my own housewarming party, while 60 people stood there watching in complete silence. Something settled inside me. Not rage. I want to be precise about that because the distinction matters. It wasn't rage. It was clarity. It was that sharp, crystalline calm that arrives when you've been waiting for a moment for a very long time, and when it finally appears, you know exactly what to do. "Cassandra," I said. She turned toward me. "Come back in here for a moment." She walked back, still holding her wine glass, with Eric following behind her. My mother shifted position so she could observe more closely. The room had gone completely still. 60 people stood there without moving. I walked over to my phone, which was connected to the television I had set up in the living room for the evening. I opened the first document. "I filed a restraining order," I said, "when I was 18 years old, 2 weeks after I was told to pack my bags and ended up sleeping in my car. I never used it, but I filed it because I needed there to be a legal record that I had nowhere to go and that the people responsible for me had made that choice deliberately. I looked at Cassandra. Then I looked at my mother. And I kept the paperwork. The room was so quiet I could hear the ice shifting in someone's glass. I opened the second document. This, I continued, is a credit report pulled in my name in 2012, when I was 19 years old and in my first semester at UMass. I let the image remain on the screen for a moment. There are 2 accounts listed here that I did not open. A Visa card with a balance of $14,000 and a personal loan for $31,000. A combined debt of $45,000 in my name, attached to my social security number, with a signature that misspelled my middle name. Paused briefly. My middle name is Renee. The signature on the loan application spells it Renee. It's a small detail, but it's exactly the kind of detail that matters when you're trying to prove a forgery. I heard Eric make a quiet, wordless sound. Something low, not quite a word. I spent 3 years cleaning up that debt, I said. I paid back $45,000 that I never borrowed, while working 2 jobs and finishing my degree. I didn't report it at the time because I was 19 and scared, and despite all the evidence, I still believed there might be some explanation I hadn't understood. For years I convinced myself that I must have misunderstood something. I was very good at telling myself that. I looked at Cassandra. Her face had turned the color of old wax. The loan was traced to an account in your name, Cassandra. The application was filed from an address in Arlington, Massachusetts. You had moved there 6 months earlier, into the house that was partially purchased using my college fund. By then, the silence in the room had a weight to it. Pressed against everything. I paid off the debt you stole from me, I said, while sleeping in my car. What happened next didn't unfold in one clean, dramatic moment, because life almost never works that way. Instead, it happened gradually in small increments the way most real things do. Eric looked at Cassandra and quietly asked her if it was true.
She remained silent for a long while. Finally, she spoke and said, "It's more complicated than that," a phrase that reveals almost nothing on the surface, yet somehow conveys everything at once. I informed everyone in the room that I was not finished speaking. Then I displayed a third collection of documents, financial records I had obtained through entirely legal channels after 2 years of effort and with the assistance of a meticulous attorney. These papers revealed that Cassandra had invested $214,000 in a series of highly speculative real estate ventures between 2018 and 2022. Every one of those investments had failed. More importantly, Eric, whose entire professional career revolves around finance, had no record of approving or even knowing about those investments. The reason was simple. He had never been told. Cassandra had quietly transferred money out of their joint accounts in carefully measured amounts, each transfer deliberately kept just under the reporting threshold. She moved those funds into accounts Eric could not access, using them to finance projects she managed on her own. She also absorbed the losses on her own, silently folding them into the growing structure of debt she had been constructing behind the polished facade of their comfortable life in Arlington. Eric slowly lowered himself onto the couch, my couch, in my house during my housewarming party, and buried his face in his hands. My mother finally broke the silence and said, "Cassandra, what have you done?" It was the first time in my life I had ever heard that particular tone directed at my sister. For years, it had been reserved exclusively for me.
Cassandra began to cry.
This was not the dramatic, performative weeping of someone putting on a show for an audience. It was raw and unfiltered, the kind of harsh, broken crying that comes from someone watching the entire structure of their life collapse while standing in the middle of the wreckage. Strangely, it brought me no satisfaction.
I want to be honest about that.
Over the years, I had imagined this confrontation many times, playing it out in different ways in my mind. Yet none of those imagined scenarios prepared me for what I actually felt in that moment. Instead of triumph, what settled over me was something closer to deep exhaustion. "I'm not selling this house," I said calmly. "I'm not leaving this house. And I'm certainly not downsizing into a condo so that your children can move into my bedroom." Then I turned toward my mother. And I am not going to keep absorbing the consequences of decisions made on my behalf without my consent again. My mother opened her mouth as if to respond, but before she could speak, I continued. I am, however, setting up education accounts for Dylan, Maddie, and Owen. There will be 3 accounts. I've already arranged the contributions and the structure. The funds are secure and will go directly to their educational institutions when the time comes. I paused before adding, those accounts are for the children, regardless of whatever happens between the adults in this room. They didn't make any of these choices. Then I faced the roughly 60 people gathered inside my home, some close friends, some acquaintances, and a few people I had just met that evening. All of them had just witnessed a confrontation none of them had been invited to see. I'm sorry for the disruption, I told them. The food is still warm, the wine is still open, and I truly hope we can spend the rest of the evening enjoying each other's company. I'd love for you all to stay.
Most of them did stay.
My mother did not. She walked straight out the front door without saying another word. I watched her leave and felt a quiet, complicated grief as I realized she might never fully face what she had done. Some people never do. Some spend their entire lives protecting themselves from that kind of reckoning because confronting it would simply cost too much. I have come to accept that her version of peace may never resemble mine. Cassandra remained seated on my couch long after most of the guests returned to their conversations. Eric sat beside her, though not particularly close. Neither of them spoke. Professor Reynolds eventually brought them both glasses of water. That is simply the kind of person he is. Later he found me in the kitchen, placed a hand gently on my shoulder, and said nothing at all.
Nothing needed to be said.
Stephanie, meanwhile, quietly refilled everyone's wine glasses and managed to keep the evening alive. The months that followed were far from easy. I won't pretend otherwise. Eric filed for divorce in November, and the legal proceedings uncovered the full extent of Cassandra's hidden financial world, a parallel life of money and risk operating alongside the life everyone thought they knew. The disclosure process was devastating for both of them. By February, the Arlington house was listed for sale. Cassandra moved back into my mother's home with the children. I say this without any sense of victory. There is nothing satisfying about watching 3 children be uprooted, confused, and forced to carry the weight of adult mistakes they had no role in creating. I think about Dylan, Maddie, and Owen more often than I can easily explain. They are 7, 9, and 11 years old. They are completely innocent. The education accounts I created for them are real, carefully structured, protected, and waiting for them whenever they need them. To his credit, Eric contacted me in January and asked if we could talk. We met for coffee in Cambridge. He apologized, not on Cassandra's behalf, but for himself. He said he regretted the years he had spent within a family dynamic that treated me as disposable while he stayed silent. I knew something was wrong, he admitted, staring down at his coffee cup. But I kept telling myself it wasn't my place to interfere. After a pause, he added quietly, "It was my place." I appreciated that more than I could fully express. Since then, we've maintained a quiet and cautious connection for the sake of the children. I see them occasionally. They are adjusting in the resilient and heartbreaking way children so often do. 6 months before the housewarming, I started therapy. I want to say that clearly because it matters. The clarity I had that night, the ability to stay calm instead of acting out of anger, the steadiness to hold my ground without needing anyone's approval or understanding, didn't appear out of nowhere. It came from 2 full years of weekly sessions with a therapist named Dr. Patricia OSI, who works out of an office in Brooklyn and has an extraordinary talent for asking the kind of questions that make you realize you've known the answer all along but were too afraid to speak it aloud. Therapy taught me something important: the difference between revenge and resolution. From the inside, when you are hurting, they can feel almost identical. Both seem to move in the same direction. But revenge requires someone else to suffer, while resolution only requires that you stop absorbing the damage, stop minimizing the harm, and stop offering grace beyond the point where grace begins to turn into self-destruction. The documents I presented that night were never meant to be a weapon. They were a record. And I kept them for years, Not because I planned to use them as a weapon, but because I had learned at 18 that, without evidence, the truth is just a story that the most powerful person in the room gets to revise. I had the evidence. And when the moment came, I used it, not to destroy, to stop. A year after the housewarming, I held a smaller gathering. 12 people, Stephanie and her girlfriend, Professor Reynolds, 3 colleagues I trust completely, 2 friends from my UMass years, who had watched the whole arc of this from a respectful distance. No catered service, just food I made myself over the course of 2 days because cooking is the thing I do when I want to feel grounded. It was a Saturday in September, and the weather had cooperated, warm enough to open the French doors onto the backyard, where the oak tree was just beginning to turn. Dylan was there, my nephew, who is 11 now and has developed a recent obsession with computers that I find both completely predictable and genuinely delightful. We sat on the porch swing in the afternoon before everyone else arrived, and I showed him how to write a very simple Python script that printed a message of his choosing onto the screen. He chose "Hello" from Dylan. We ran it 14 times. Cassandra came by briefly in the late afternoon before the evening guests arrived. She stood in the doorway of the kitchen, and she looked smaller than she'd ever looked. Not thin, just quieter, like something that had been at high volume for years had finally been turned down. She said, "I know I can't undo it." She said, "I'm sorry." She didn't say sorry for anything specific. And I noticed that, and I held it, and I decided that the absence of specificity was probably all I was going to get, and that for now it was enough to have heard the word at all. My mother called the following week. She talked for a long time about how difficult the past year had been, how much she had lost, how hard it was to watch Cassandra struggle.
She didn't mention me.
She didn't ask how I was. At the end of the call, after a long pause, she said, "I should have done things differently." It was the closest she's ever come. I said, "Yes." She said, "I know." And then we talked about the weather for 2 minutes and said goodbye. I don't expect more than that.
I've stopped expecting more than that.
The expectation I've come to understand was the thing that kept me tethered to the wound. When you stop waiting for the apology to be complete, when you stop needing the other person to understand the full scale of what they did in order for you to be okay, something loosens, not everything. There's still a version of me that is 18 and standing in a parking garage and crying into a jacket that smells like old upholstery. She'll always be there. But she doesn't have to live in the foyer of my house.
I hold the keys to this place.
I decide who walks through the door. I want to leave you with something real, because I think you came to this story looking for something real. If you've ever been told that you were the sturdy one, the self-sufficient one, the one who could handle it, I want you to know that sturdy is not the same as fine. Handling something is not the same as not being hurt by it. And the fact that you survived something without falling apart does not mean that the thing was okay. Do not let the people who benefit from your resilience use your resilience as evidence that you didn't need anything. If you've ever had something taken from you by someone who should have protected it, your money, your time, your name, your story, your sense of what was real, I want to tell you that keeping records is not paranoid. Documentation is not vindictive. Knowing the truth of what happened to you, even when no one else will confirm it, is not crazy. It is survival. It is the thing that will matter 14 years later, when the moment comes. And if you've ever been told to pack your bags by the person who is supposed to be the safest person in the world to you, I want you to know that the leaving, as excruciating as it is, as cold and alone and impossible as it feels in the parking garage at 2 a.m, was sometimes the thing that saves your life. It saved mine. The house I built is made of. Every night, I drove away from a version of myself that didn't know yet what she was capable of. Every zero in that number is proof that the leaving was the right thing. They told me to pack my bags, and I did. And then I built something they could never take back. 14 years ago, I walked out a door with nothing but a bag and a terrifying amount of uncertainty. Today, I hold the keys, and I decide who walks through mine. If you enjoyed this story, you know what to do.